This week, Kawasaki announced a new contender in the middleweight adventure category called the KLE500, perhaps their most anticipated bike in the last few years. So does it look like it can go up against the established competition in this part of the market? And is it therefore one to consider for 2026? Well, in this video, we'll go through all of the details they've announced so far to find out. Now, this one is built upon the same parallel twin as the other 500s in their lineup, like the Z500 Naked, the Ninja 500 Sports Bike, and also the Eliminator 500 Cruisers. So while they haven't released the full homologated specs for the KLE today, well, given that it's the same 451cc twin, well, I think it's safe to assume it'll make a figure close to the 44 horsepower at 9,000 RPM of the other models. I'd also expect it to make the same 42 Nm of peak torque, and that would put it right in the same ballpark as most of the competition, like the CF Moto 450 MT, the Royal Enfield Himalayan 450, and the KTM 390 Adventure. All of them make roughly 40 horsepower, perhaps a little more for some of them, and all of them make roughly 40 Nm of peak torque. And while we don't have the specs yet for BMW's imminent F450 GS or Aprilia's expected Touareg 457, well look, they're all A2 bikes, and so I'd expect them to be pretty close too. So what I think will more so set the bikes apart in this particular class is actually the engine's configuration, and as a result, the feel and sound and character that each of them produces. The KTM and the Enfield, for example, are both single cylinders, and so ideal if you like that specific sound and the chuggability, I suppose, of a thumper. The CF Moto and the Aprilia 450 motor are both cross-plane 270-degree crank twins, and so they're probably the ones to go for if you like a bit of that V-twin growl. The BMW, well, that's going to get apparently a very unusual 125-degree firing interval, and so it'll have its own unique position on the market, whilst this Kawasaki gets a 180-degree crank, and so again, something a little different to the rest of the market. To be honest, this Kawasaki 500, well, it's not the most exotic sounding bike you'll ever come across, but it is a proven motor for them, and I dare say if you try it, you might just find out that it's your cup of tea. Now, whilst long-distance touring isn't necessarily the main forte of a bike like this, you still want to be able to tick off some decent miles, and so I think the fact that they've confirmed it gets a 16-litre tank will be welcome news and should be enough, especially when paired with a relatively frugal 450 twin. That is 2 litres more than the Ninja or the Z500, and so assuming it will get the same fuel consumption figures, well, it should be good for about 400 kilometers or 260 miles on a tank, assuming you're able to be fairly steady on the throttle. That's a little bit more than the KTM at 14 litres. A little less than the Himalayan and CF Moto, which are around the 17 mark, but all the same, I reckon that sort of mileage for a bike like this is going to be absolutely sufficient. Now onto the chassis, and again, the full specs are still TBC, but there's enough info in the press release to get a fairly decent idea of roughly how this bike is going to ride. Now there's a steel trellis frame as with the other 500s, so no huge surprise there, but it's suspended on KYB suspension with an upside down fork and a new Unitrack rear suspension setup. No word on the specifics with regards to adjustability, but they do say travel will sit at 210mm up front and 200 at the rear, so plenty for most, if not full-on enduro levels of capability, but it should leave for a decent amount of ground clearance as well. Wheels, of course, are spoked with a 21-incher up front and a 17 at the rear. Tyres are from IRC with the Adventure GP410s, and I guess from the looks of things, they're going to be tube type, which is either a good or bad thing depending on how you like to repair your punctures. Braking looks fairly modest with a single disc up front, but that is generally the approach when it comes to more off-road biased bikes, and there is switchable ABS, which of course is good news for those rightly wanting to take it off-road for a bit of a slide. Now, unfortunately, we didn't get a weight figure as of yet, so we'll have to wait and see as to where it comes in, but it does look overall fairly decent and set up to tackle at least some moderate trails. As long as they keep it under 200 kilos, I think it will be competitive with the rest of the market. Although I will say for the price, I think the CF Moto 450 MT is possibly the gold standard with tubeless tyres, a radial 4-pot brake caliper up front, and fairly generously adjustable suspension too. The KTM, you pay a little more, we'll get onto the prices a bit later, but you do get, again, good braking, a great chassis, a very lightweight as well, and also their in-house WP suspension, which is, pretty much always good stuff. The Himalayan, well, that's a solid performer as well, and so the Kawasaki does have its work cut out, but it does look initially decent, if not exceptional in any one area. Now, naturally, from a bike like this, you can expect a fairly dirt-friendly riding position, and they say the rider triangle has been somewhat inspired by their KX line of bikes. So it'll be no big surprise that it does sit pretty tall, with a seat height that comes in at 860mm. Taller than a Himalayan and a CF Moto, for example, but you could consider it a good thing as it does allow for decent ground clearance, along with an easy transition between sitting and standing, which you'll do a lot of if you do take this bike off-road. That's one of the few criticisms I've got of that CF Moto 450 MT, to be honest, is that the seat feels relatively low to the rest of the bike. It feels a little bit like you're sitting on a cruiser because it's got those high and wide handlebars, and so hopefully this 860mm seat height will feel more congruous with the rest of the touch points on the bike. On top of that, they do confirm there will be some flexibility as well, with low seats available for both the rider and passenger, and I believe the press release is kind of implying that you can choose a combo of the two. So a good example would be a high seat for the rider but the low passenger seat, which effectively gives you a nice long bench that sits pretty flat, allowing the rider to easily move back and forth on the bike. So again, good for off-roading. If, however, you do want to take a passenger, well, that high seat apparently has a bit more padding, so it's probably the more comfy of the two. And on top of that, if you do want to take on a little bit of light touring, then they also say in the accessories catalogue there'll be 3-piece luggage available as well. On to the tech front though, and you've got two options here because the standard bike comes with an LCD dash, so that'll give you maximum simplicity and affordability, but there's also an SE version which apparently will cost a little bit more, and that one comes with a TFT dash that looks pretty decent as well. On top of that, the SE gets a bigger windscreen, sturdier handguards and a bigger bash plate, and so not only one for the tech lover, but also if you do want something a little more robust, then it could well be worth the upgrade. That said, both dashes apparently have some connectivity with the Kawasaki Rideology app, and so that means you can get a riding log, navigation and some voice commands. Then you've got LED lighting all round, along with a few techie options in the accessories catalogue like heated grips, USB-C socket and LED fog lights, so some nice touches if you so wish. But I will say overall, with no traction control or riding modes mentioned, well, it does sound like a relatively simple affair. Not one for the early adopter perhaps, but I do know a lot of riders like their adventure bikes as simple as possible, and so certainly the base model will fulfill that requirement. As for the looks, well, I think it's quite a cool looking bike. It certainly has a bit of that rally vibe about it, and you can either go for a stealthy black and grey on the standard bike, or with the SE you've got 3 options. One is white with lime green accents, one is a sort of grey and green, but I think my favourite of the bunch would be this nice deep green with a bit of white and red on the graphics. Overall, I'd say not a bad looking bike, still recognisably a Kawasaki, but a little bit different to anything else that they've got in the lineup at the moment. I guess the biggest factor though as to whether this bike will sell well or not is gonna be the price, with a super competitive part of the market and some really good prices. The Himalayan, for example, comes in at under $6,000 if you want the most basic paint job. The CF Moto at $5,699, which is just very impressive given all the kit you get. And even the KTM 390 Adventure R, which might get the best suspension and could be the most off-road capable, well, that comes in at $6,699, which is, a little more, but it's still not a massively high price either. So you'd have to imagine that Kawasaki are going to be looking at somewhere around that $6,000 mark for the base model. Perhaps a little more 6.5 to 7 for the SE, but I guess, like with some of the other specs, only time will tell with this one. So what do you think of this new KLE500? It's been teased for about a year now, so there was certainly a bit of anticipation around it, and so I'd love to know from you whether it's the simple but capable middleweight you were hoping for, or is there a little bit more that they could have done? Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and I'll leave my reviews of the CF Moto and the Himalayan on the screen now in a playlist, both of which I thought were pretty good, so you can give them a watch and catch up ahead of reviewing this bike when the 2026 press bikes start to roll in. I also recently rode that new KTM 390 Adventure R, so do hit subscribe if you want to see that review as soon as it goes live. That one's currently in the edit, and also hit subscribe for all the latest new bike news right here on MOTOBOB. A massive thanks for watching today, and hopefully we'll catch you in the next video.